So, this question has been on my mind since I finished watching the first season of House of the Dragon. Who would actually make the best king or queen of Westeros after Viserys' death? And I'm not just talking about Rhaenyra versus Aegon, who are the obvious candidates, but I decided to do a little thought experiment and consider some other characters as well. Of course, we know that, spoiler alert, Aegon III, one of Rhaenyra's sons, becomes king after the Dance of Dragons is over, but I wanted to explore a few other options for Viserys' direct successor. Not because they would necessarily have a realistic chance to sit on the Iron Throne, but more so out of curiosity for what kind of ruler they might make. And some of these options would perhaps never lead to the weakening of the Targaryen dynasty and to the Civil War. As always, this analysis is based only on the TV show depiction of characters, not on their characterization in the book, so as to avoid confusion. Now, let's dive in. Our first and very obvious candidate is Princess Rhaenyra. Chosen by King Viserys as his heir despite her gender, Rhaenyra grew up believing that she will sit on the throne one day. Not at first, since it was expected that Viserys and his wife Aemma will have more children, and among them a boy at some point, but shortly after her mother's death, and despite Viserys' second marriage to Alicent Hightower, Rhaenyra is appointed by Viserys as his heir, and the noble houses of Westeros are called to swear fealty to her. Despite being a woman, she is the king's eldest child, and she arguably had the best claim until Aegon was born. And considering Viserys' decision that she should remain next in line, despite him now having sons, her claim is still valid. It's the king's decision, though it clashes with the laws of Westeros. Viserys ensuring that his daughter has allies for her future reign may have been a good decision, but it was nevertheless a small one sandwiched between a lot of poor ones. Rhaenyra's gender is her biggest obstacle due to the rules of the realm, and so is Viserys not changing the rules after choosing Rhaenyra as his successor. But a big mistake was also not preparing his daughter for ruling. As far as Rhaenyra's political interests, knowledge, as well as leadership skills go, we can point out a few things. While she does seem to be merciful and doesn't act carelessly, and we can say that she does exhibit some degree of tactical thinking if it's fair to call it that, I would still argue that she lacks primarily a sense of duty, which is evident in her not siring trueborn sons. This is of course relevant for their future claim to the throne and the stability of the realm. Even if most lords would somehow accept Rhaenyra as queen due to that being Viserys' wish and command, I imagine things would go down pretty quickly when it would eventually come to Rhaenyra's eldest son Jacaerys ascending to the throne. His questionable legitimacy would likely destabilize the realm already during Rhaenyra's reign. In addition to these issues, Rhaenyra is very underprepared for handling any court duties since, as we can see, she spends most of her time away on Dragonstone. This is something the heir would do traditionally, but it makes her isolated from her subjects, Westerosi lords, and the realm's policies. In that time, the Hightowers are the ones who rule in King Viserys' place while he is sick, whereas Rhaenyra is not present at court and has little idea of the current situation in the realm. Perhaps even more importantly, she is not making allies and ensuring that she nurtures and maintains the support that her father has tried to ensure for her. She appears to be putting way too much faith into her father-given right to the crown, and we know that she uses her father's affection in her favor to get away with things and even to gaslight those around her. She's acting as the heir, but realistically putting in very little effort and showing little responsibility towards her people and ultimately towards her role. Our next candidate is Aegon, King Viserys' oldest male child from his second marriage. According to the realm's laws and customs, this would make him the heir apparent. But things are not as simple because, for better or for worse, Viserys sticks to his decision to make Rhaenyra the heir, and his favoritism of his daughter over his children with Alicent is as obvious as can be. Aegon has tradition and laws on his side. He is the eldest trueborn male child of the reigning monarch, and this alone is a very good claim, although it clashes with Viserys' ultimate decision. But in terms of Aegon's capabilities and lifestyle, he does not seem to be a very good choice for a king either. From what we can see in Season 1 of House of the Dragon, he is neither interested nor prepared to be king. Aegon is more interested in having fun, living a leisurely life of a prince. However, he does have trueborn children by his sister wife Laena, and although people have speculated about their parentage, these children certainly have very Targaryen features, unlike Rhaenyra's eldest sons. Despite Aegon's personality, upbringing, and lack of desire and responsibility to rule, I think that he might still be one of the better candidates to sit on the Iron Throne, if someone capable was actually ruling behind the scenes and calling the shots. For example, if Aemond were the heir, I can't imagine that he would ever let someone rule in his stead. But for Aegon, based on what we've seen, I think he could be content playing the king, being the poster boy if you will. With him on the throne, that might actually create the most stability in the realm. His claim is hard to refute because, while he may not have been chosen subjectively by Viserys, he still objectively has the best claim. I think if he didn't have to take on any responsibility and his grandfather and mother perhaps reigned instead of him behind the curtain, Aegon could be the best glue that holds the realm together, simply because the Westerosi laws are in his favor. This solution might ensure temporary peace and stability, but of course it doesn't really make for a good king per se. Now, Daemon is definitely the biggest hypothetical ruler here, since he isn't really that high up in line for the throne, but I think it's interesting to briefly explore what kind of a king he might make if, for example, Viserys never had children. In this alternative timeline, a lot of things would be different from the start though. If Viserys really died childless, then Daemon would most likely be prepared to rule from a certain point in his life onward. In that case, many of his actions would almost certainly be different, but we can only speculate, so let's look at what we actually get in House of the Dragon in terms of Daemon's characterization and life. While he may be more ambitious than his older brother, more proactive and more eager to wage war, we also know that Daemon lacks patience as well as interest in actual governing. Based on the show's portrayal, I think Daemon's impulsive, often reckless and headstrong nature would potentially get him in trouble. In some cases, these traits might well prove to be effective, but for the most part, I think they would cause more harm than good, both to the realm and Daemon's reputation as king. A lot would also depend on his hand. Otto Hightower would not be able to manipulate Daemon as much as he does Viserys, whether that would be for the better or worse of the kingdom. And of course, there's also the question of succession. Daemon, as we know, has 2 daughters by Laena Velaryon, but no male heirs, and Rhaenyra doesn't exist in this alternative timeline, so the question remains, who would he marry in order to produce legitimate male offspring? In the actual story, he was never a likely candidate for the throne, and if he were, many events would certainly play out differently, including his marriage. If Laena were to die, like she does in the story, it's likely that the Hightowers would still seek power through marriage alliance, and Alicent might end up queen consort even in this scenario, so long as Otto Hightower didn't end up being Daemon's enemy. It's a bit of a reach to speculate this far into the realm of hypotheticals, but to conclude this section, I don't think Daemon would make a great ruler, though potentially a better one than we might assume, with the right people by his side. Simply by virtue of being a legitimate male heir, at least the Targaryen civil war would likely be avoided with him on the throne. Now we come to another possibility, and I personally find this one to be the most intriguing one, though not likely. What kind of queen would Rhaenys be if the Lords of Westeros decided in her favor instead of Viserys's at the Great Council? We often hear that Rhaenys was more ambitious and that Viserys would have been perfectly content being a country lord with his little model of Westeros in history books instead of a crown on his head. We don't know that much about Rhaenys' views on governing in the show, but we do know that she understands the game, that she is willing to sacrifice her daughter into a marriage in exchange for power. She is clever and driven, and she does show loyalty to her house and allies as well as mercy to her enemies, whether that scene made sense in the show or not. But is that enough to make her a good queen? Well, I think it's fair to assume that she wouldn't allow people to make decisions for her, and she would not have surrounded herself with questionable and controlling advisors, though I'm sure many ambitious men would strive to usurp the throne behind the scenes. As the potential first Queen of Westeros, Rhaenys would have her work cut out for her, and even if the council decided in her favor, she would probably have to fight tooth and claw to maintain that power, influence, and to hold the realm together. It's very likely that she would be underestimated because of her gender, but I'm sure that her marriage to Corlys would be a great advantage since he would garner respect with his military power and heritage. The fact that Rhaenys has, and let's assume that would be the case in this alternative timeline too, 2 children, one of which is male, that might be enough to stabilize the realm. Even those against Rhaenys might be content with her as queen for a while, knowing that her son would sooner or later sit on the throne. The thing is though, if we imagine that Rhaenys was chosen as the next queen after Jaehaerys, it would also be fair to assume that the male preference primogeniture might be abolished after this point. And since Laena is older than her brother, we could well get another queen after Rhaenys. Honestly, Laena would probably make a really cool queen. We didn't get that much of her in the show, but she's pretty fierce. She rides Vhagar, who is basically a living remnant from the days of Aegon the Conqueror, which would perhaps symbolically solidify her power. And Laena seems to be clever and driven, much like her mother. We can't know if she would make a good queen, because we've never really seen her in any kind of position of power, so to speak. But in this hypothetical scenario, let's say that the concept of a Queen of Westeros is already sort of established and the road is paved by her mother. So if Rhaenys' reign went well, and the Westerosi laws were changed to remove male preference primogeniture, Laena might actually make a good candidate for the next Queen of Westeros. Of course, there are a lot of ifs and a lot of guessing involved here, but I think this scenario is an exciting one to imagine. I generally don't think that the Westerosi society would be ready for a queen, let alone potentially several queens down the line, and if they did make an exception for Rhaenys, I doubt that the laws would be changed to allow Laena to inherit her mother's title and throne, no matter her capabilities and how much she proved herself. Now, I don't think we can say with certainty who the best candidate for the Iron Throne would be, of course, but in an ideal scenario, we at least wouldn't have several potential claimants and a civil war. And it's also hard to pinpoint where the root of the issue lies, whether it's Viserys or if the trouble began even before his time. Well, yes, to a certain degree it surely did, but I think Viserys' decision to name Rhaenyra as his heir and marrying again, having male offspring, was the final nail in the coffin that ensured that after his death, major disputes and instability of the Targaryen dynasty were unavoidable. Now let me know who you would most like to see on the Iron Throne and why. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.